Every one of us in this room, we've got dreams, things with all our heart we'd really like to do. But I promise you, the only way to get there is to make today count. Start and be faithful in the small things.
One of the reasons I'm a Christian is that the Lord Jesus himself handled these things so sensitively. There's a story that's meant a lot to me in the last few days, and it's well known to many people. It's the story of a family tragedy. The family of three at Bethany, Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And Lazarus got very ill. We don't know what he was ill from. And they sent a message to Jesus, who was in another village, quite a long way away, and just said, the person that you love is ill. And of course, they reckoned that his love would mean he would come. So now there's the first thing that relates directly to our situation today.
I'm taking notes as you talk. So
there are many people who believe in the love of God and of the Lord, but why is he so distant? Why doesn't he come? Is he in self-isolation like we are, or in quarantine? And so it would seem that they began, because they'd seen him cure people before, they began to doubt his love. But in the end, he came, but not until Lazarus had died. So he allowed that to happen. And that raises another big question in the current context. But let's leave that for a second. Martha met him and immediately challenged him and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. You weren't here. You were at a distance. Why weren't you here? Because I know you've got the power to do something about it. And he looked at her and he said, your brother will rise again. And you know, the sensitivity of that is remarkable. He didn't say Lazarus would rise again, although that was the case. He said, your brother. There's something about the Christian gospel that gives us really hope for the continuation of what is beautiful and real about the most meaningful relationships we've had. They will survive death. Your brother will rise again. And Martha was theologically trained. She was a real intellectual. Her brother was in the grave, just there in the field probably, and yet she's arguing theology. And she says, Lord, I know he'll be raised in the last judgment, in the last time, in the resurrection. And he then drops a bomb and says, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, even though he dies, yet shall he live. Now, this must have been enigmatic. What did he mean, I am the resurrection? We learn earlier in John's Gospel that what that means is his voice has the power to operate the resurrection. But just let's leave that for a second, because Martha thinks of her sister, Mary, who's sitting at home utterly distraught. Her needs are not intellectual, they're emotional, like that of many of you listening to us today. We want a touch, a hug, if only we were allowed to do it. And so Mary comes and she's weeping and she's upset. And Jesus sees what death, the death of the brother, has done to that little nuclear family. He doesn't argue. He doesn't talk about the resurrection. He weeps. That's what God's like. And you know, on the bigger scale, one of the promises that the same author, John, makes in the last book of the Bible is that there is a new world coming. And those that trust Christ, it's going to be God that will wipe away the last tear from their eyes. Now, that story for me encapsulates the width of Christ's sensitivity to our needs. Some of us, as we faced COVID-19, we've got intellectual needs. We've got real deep questions. There are responses to those questions, I firmly believe, in the New Testament. But others of us, we need a touch. We need a reassurance. We need a presence. And Jesus provides that. And the one that wept was not weeping crocodile tears, because not long after that, he suffered on a cross. And you know, Dr. Strack, as I think of that, that's the heart of the thing. You see, that tells me that God has not remained distant from our suffering, but has become part of it. So that story in the New Testament, which is one of the signs of John, pointing out who Jesus really is, comes to its climax when Jesus stood in that graveyard and with a loud voice, he said, Lazarus, come forth, come out of the grave. And the dead man did. That voice is unique. And John's claim is what happened there on a small scale will one day happen on the large scale. So even in the midst of family tragedy, whether it's part of a pandemic or just a single tragedy, Jesus can bring real hope and wants us to understand that. My peace I leave with you. Not as the world gives, I give to you. He can give us a unique peace in a relationship because it transcends death itself.